Steve Wiltfong with 24/7 Sports here with Cincinnati head football coach Luke Fickell. I see that big family photo there in the background. How are you guys doing here with you and your wife and the 6 kids cooped up in the Fickell estate here with the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, this week's a little bit tougher. So you might hear at least you think it's a stampede of some sorts that could possibly come rolling through. This week's a little bit more difficult because they're on spring break. So at least the last 2 or 3 weeks, they've been occupied for most of the morning. The weather's been pretty good here. And then this week it's, spring break and the weather's a little colder. So I think the height and where the stir craziness is starting to rise a bit. But nonetheless, there's some unique things that we are getting an opportunity to do that we would not normally be able to do.
Has there been any funny interruptions during a Zoom recruiting meeting or team recruiting meeting with a kid jumping on camera or anything like that?
I think they haven't actually been on the camera, but it's the fights that break out. I mean, we got 2 sets of twins, and at some point in time, there's going to be somebody fighting with somebody. And it's a good thing for those mute buttons, because when you're in a big meeting and all of a sudden the people on the other end see your mic go mute and then see your mouth, moving quite a bit, I think they probably realize there's something chaotic going on in your house. So if we could actually turn the camera and they could actually see what's going on, it might make for some good entertainment television.
I bet. Coach, speaking of entertaining, you had a hell of a high school career, not only as a defensive lineman, but a 3-time state champ in wrestling. What was your best sport? And I talked to several recruits a year with the ambition of doing football and another sport in college. The one that seems to work the best is football and baseball. But did you have any ambition back then of trying to do both at Ohio State?
Yeah, I did. And by far, wrestling was my first love. There's no doubt. Started at a very young age, 4 or 5 years old. Uncle, a high school wrestling coach, my dad helping out. So I grew up in a wrestling room, so to speak. And that's really kind of, to me, where I would, kind of give the credit to I'm not like a great athlete by any means, but where a lot of things developed for me in a mentality and in a way to go about things, disciplines and some of those things. But, as it grew, football became a much bigger thing to me. And it wasn't really until going into my senior year of high school that I kind of said, hey, I think football might be the route for me.
Did you have a lot of opportunities? Did you take several official visits? And when doing so, did you do that with the mindset of, hey, I'm trying to do both here in college?
It was definitely once the idea that I was going to go and play football started to kind of come, as back then it wasn't as early. So like I said, going into my senior year when the recruiting kind of started, my mindset shifted, but I always said I wanted to wrestle. So some of the things were like I was going to leave that far. I don't know that was really a possibility, but to think to go south or something where they didn't have a whole lot of wrestling programs was definitely not going to happen for me. So it was definitely when looking at where to go football wise, it was definitely had an influence on me as what's the wrestling program like? Do they have a wrestling program? Because at that time, a lot of teams were starting to drop. I think a big one for me was, kind of Notre Dame, I think, dropped the year after my senior year of high school. So, which was something I was looking at as well. And so it was definitely a factor. Didn't realize how difficult that would be. And as we move forward, 20 years or so, I almost would say it's almost impossible to do now.
What's changed in that dynamic, you think?
Well, I think a lot, and I think it more just the demands. I think the beauty of when I was in school, it was still obviously, a lot of work and to play football and things like that. But, there was some semblance of, hey, not an off season, but, a transition at time. Winter workouts were just about getting stronger. Now everything is crammed so much closer. Spring ball becomes so much closer so that you can get more sun. It's just, I think that the demands have changed in a lot of ways. The idea of, hey, going to college and playing, big time college football and enjoying a lot of the other things that come along with college, I think has, in a lot of ways, has changed a bit because of the demands and the expectations and a lot of times guys' mindset of where they want to go and how fast they want to get there.
Was it a foregone conclusion you would go to Ohio State, being from Columbus, or you go to a high school like DeSales? Was Notre Dame very legit in it until they dropped the wrestling program?
No, it's crazy because at first, to be honest with you, I thought I wanted to get away from home. So some of the things that were a little bit outside of staying 30, 40, 20, 30 miles from home was something that was in my mind. And then, as I got into it, obviously back then you actually did visits to see, the different things of a school. You just didn't do as many unofficial things like that. And, wrestling, you couldn't do a lot of those things anyway. So it didn't become really evident to me until I visited and just felt the people and more so the guys on the team and how the connections became real. So it wasn't a foregone conclusion. Hey, you're going to stay close to home. But wrestling was a bigger factor than staying close to home. That's for sure.
Now you're trying to convince a lot of kids to stay close to home. Cincinnati had the #1 group of 5 recruiting class in the country last year. You guys are in the top 25 this cycle in the 24/7 sports recruiting rankings with the class you're putting together now. And a lot of it, all your classes have been heavy locally. And obviously the high school football in your area is great with the LaSalles and the Mollers and the Elders and all that. Do you find that you're convincing kids like yourself that maybe thought, hey, when the process started, I wanted to maybe get a little away from Cincinnati too? You're trying to reel them into being Bearcats?
I think it is. I think it's a big deal. And, I think you got to put your most time and build the best relationships in those areas where it's going to be, even beneficial to you, but even and different than just great players. I think you create a lot of different things with the program when you can keep some of those guys that have a better name closer to home and locally. And, it does a lot for your fan base, a lot for your community. And obviously the city of Cincinnati is so strong in what it is that they believe in this community that when they have a little bit more of a connection with some of these guys, I think it really helps us throughout the entire community. So I think it's threefold, the ability to work at it. And it can be frustrating because, some of the guys you spend the most time with are the ones you don't get because they're close to home and because, maybe they want to get away or maybe they have some other options. And that can get frustrating, but you can't let it change you and deter you from knowing what's going to give your program an opportunity to grow and have the success on the field and off the field faster and even better than the easy routes.
Coach, you go from 4 wins in year 1. I know you're not used to 4 wins at any point in your life, but you quickly get it to 11 and then 11 again. How did you guys build it up so fast there? What are the core values, principles within your program that you guys were able to turn this thing into a promising winner so fast?
Well, I don't know if the core values or things we put on the wall have anything to do with, the success you have on the football field at times. There's some things that can look really pretty in that. I know this. In year 1, we had some talent. We won 4 games and should have won 1. And that's the reality. All 4 of those games pretty much came down to somewhat the last play of the game. And like I said, we probably should have walked away with 1 win. And we had 5 guys make an NFL roster that next year from that class. 2 were an active roster and 3 were on a practice squad. So I can't say there wasn't some talent. What we didn't have was a team. And I didn't even recognize or even have any idea that until about the Wednesday night before our last game of the regular season. And what I realized was what we didn't have was any type of trust, respect, and love and a connection within our locker room. And from that point on, I think the biggest change we had was just what goes on, the connections and the things that happen within our locker room, how our guys know and understand and believe in each other, which translates to a lot more on the football field. In year 2, we won 11 football games, and I think we had 2 guys make an NFL roster. Where the year before we won 4 games and had 5 guys make an NFL roster. And sometimes you look at that and say, well, you had more talent and oh, I think we're doing a better job at helping develop the talent, not just guys that are athletic, but guys that have a chance to become better football players. But it's not just the talent level. It was much more of an environment. I hate to use the word culture because everybody says culture, but really a reflection on what's inside our locker room. And the only way that you can, I think, take big leaps, because it takes some time in, development of talent and getting some different people and different pieces in here. But there were some unique pieces in here. What we didn't have was a connection. I mean that not just as the players. I mean that from the coaches as well. I'm the first one to say I didn't recognize what we lacked more than anything else, probably the first 8 months I was here.
So as a leader of young men with your staff, what kind of things do you do to bring a group of talented individuals together that then spits out the outcome of 22 wins and hopefully this year a New Year's Six Bowl and beyond?
Well, I think it's an example, and you can't preach one thing and kind of, be something different. I think that's, no matter what kind of book you're reading on leadership, there's a million different things that can tell you a million different ways. The reality is especially when you're new in what it is you do and trying to figure out not just development of leadership, who are the leaders in your program, I think you got to set some incredible examples. And we're fortunate enough in that first year to year two to have examples. And I don't just mean players, I mean guys and coaches that really kind of rally behind the things that you believe in and the selfless sacrifice to make each other better. And you can preach that, but if you don't have people that are demonstrating it, it's really difficult. And, some people would say, I got to get my own guys. Well, the reality is you got to get those older guys, which are much more difficult to get them to believe in who you are and what you're doing and the people you are in a short amount of time. When I've never been in their homes, I don't know their families. I don't know how they were raised. So I think it's a combination. It's not like we had this retreat and it changed the way we did everything. Everyone had an epiphany, but it's a consistency over time of, a relationship, developing that off the football field, at your own home, really try to dive into some guys' lives to get them to believe in the things that you're doing, not just the techniques and the fundamentals you're teaching them.
Coach, recruits are obviously believing in y'all on the trail as you guys are landing many of your top targets. The head coach's role in recruiting today compared to early in your career when you were recruiting for your alma mater at Ohio State. Talk about those changes and the impact that you think the head coach has to have now in this thing and in this environment.
Well, I think it's another example to your program. I mean, you like to say who's the best recruiter on your team. Well, it's a lot easier for me to say when I was an assistant under Jim Tressel and an assistant under Urban Meyer, they were the two best recruiters on the staff. It's hard to say that when you're the guy sitting in the seat, but the reality is if you're not working at it, if you're not trying to build those relationships, which are so key in recruiting, if you're not trying to do that, you're not an example to your staff on how you do your best job of recruiting. And then you're not really creating some of that stuff amongst the kids that you're recruiting. So it's definitely different. I think the strength and the weight that a head coach carries is really key because, any parent, any family wants to know what the leadership is going to look like. They get to know an assistant coach or the coordinator or the position coach really, really well. But deep down inside, I want to know, okay, well, what's making the whole thing tick? And these people are like they are probably for a reason. And what's it like, from that seat? And to have a relationship with, the head coach to me is really important. And, if I'm a parent of my son, I want to know that, that there's a guy at the top or the guy that's sitting in that seat, that A, cares, and that B, feels like they're connected to what's going on, not just in my kid's life and something that we would have to do with. So I think it's a huge role. I think that it's becoming more and more evident that is, there's a lot of those guys that are similar in what you do, but if there's not a role, if there's not a connection, if there's not a visibility and a relationship with the head guy, I think it's going to be really difficult to do a lot and to get a lot of the right ones. I'm not saying that there's not different guys that go to different places for different reasons. But in our program, to have the right ones means somebody that wants some relationship, somebody that wants something bigger than just wins on the football field. And in order to do that, they got to have a relationship a bit with the head coach as well.
Coach, give me 2 or 3 of your like biggest recruiting wins in your career, or ones maybe where you didn't think you were going to get the kid, or one where you feel like you had to go an extra mile or two to win it out, or maybe it's an Evan Prater just keeping him home. You know.
There's some. I think the ones I remember the most are the ones you lose. You know, hey, I had an incredible connection with this guy, and you know, from the time I played, I remember there was a kid when I first started. I don't know if you remember Fred Davis. I coached Tress in my very first year at at Ohio State for Coach Tress. He told me, if you don't get this guy, you know, you're out. He was never going to get rid of me, but it was like the first big time, and did everything. I thought that I had the greatest relationship with him and Coach Rios and everybody, and I got a call one like about midnight one night and said, I just saw the kid on a red eye that just enrolled at USC, you know, 2 weeks after this the winter had started. So I remember some of those losses. Cameron Hayward is one that I really remember, because it was a guy that didn't take an official visit because everything was late, and thought for sure that he was going to go to Georgia, hometown. Had a great relationship with his mother. And I just remember her when she finally said, look, he needs to get away from me. It's time for him to go out and grow. And, you know, from that moment on, I said, we got a chance. Never got a chance to get him on an official visit before he actually signed. But there was a lot of connection, a lot of work done to build that and stay with it, thinking that, you know, there's the inevitable is, you know, Athens is, you know, 40 miles down the road or 30 minutes down the road, that this guy's naturally going to stay close to home with a big family like that. So, you know, you can go from there to the ones that everybody would say the Bosa family, like, wow, you went down to South Florida and got the Bosa family. Well, yeah, the mom went to school at Ohio State, and there was a lot of connections within the family, but so unique in many different ones. I think the ones you remember and some of the ones you work the hardest on are the ones you don't get. And where it can be frustrating, you realize it's a part of the game, and you got to figure out maybe what ways you could have done a little bit better.
Were there any prospects or experiences on the trail or players you coached that you learned something from or impacted you? Maybe you learned something about their culture, or when you went down for an in-home, or you really got to know them when you coached them, and it's kind of changed who you are today.
Well, I think I think in all those different ways. I think the great thing about recruiting is if you can't connect with different people, and I mean that from every walk of life, you know, sometimes I think, and I try to say this, inside a locker room, there is no color, there is no religious background, there is no political issue. I mean, if guys believe in each other, they work for something bigger than themselves, you know, and it's the same way in recruiting. You got to find a way that you can connect with every different walk of life and every different place, and you got to be comfortable. You know, I remember going down to Immokalee, Florida, and recruiting Brian Roll. And his mom used to always make fun of me. And she said, I can't wait till you get to do the in-home, because I'm going to cook you some soul food. And I used to always have this vision of fish with a head on it and all these bones in it. And I was going to have to eat some of this food in Immokalee, Florida, that she was telling me she was going to prepare for me. And went on a home visit, and literally she left the plate in the middle of the table as we did the visit, covered, so that you couldn't see what was in it. And the whole time I'm doing a visit, thinking that when she takes that off, there's going to be a fish there with a head still on it and bones in it, and I'm going to have to eat this thing. And it wasn't. It was just some greens and some chicken wings. But I think she pretty much played along the whole time, just trying to see where I was and see what I was going to do and see how I was going to react. But I think those are the things that help you to realize, like, you know what, you've got to be able to relate. Doesn't mean you change, but you got to be able to relate and understand every different walk of life. And I think that's what, when you get them in your program, in order to maximize them, if you haven't spent time in their home, if you don't know how they've grown up and a little bit of background on who they are, I think it's really difficult to build a really, really strong relationship with them in order to make them the best possible player and person that they can be. And that's that for me was what has been most difficult coming here in the first 2 years, that you built some great relationships with those guys who are with you for a year or two, but never been in their home, never have had any type of connection or relationship with their family, makes it a little bit more difficult, I think, to have as strong a relationship as you need to do this thing the right way.
Coach, just a couple more. When you're out recruiting, how big is that multi-sport deal go into the equation when you're evaluating prospects and wrestlers? Do they get extra bonus points with you?
They definitely do. It's in our evaluation of an offensive lineman, not always a defensive lineman, but an offensive lineman is, do they wrestle? But I think I love multi-sport athletes, not because I did it, but I think, it's a competitiveness that guys, I love guys that go out there and aren't great. They go and run track, but, they might not win everything. They go out there and they wrestle and they're not very good. They get their butt kicked, but to continue to go back and continue to do it because they love to compete and they know it's going to make them better. And then in the long run, I think that when you look at a multi-sport athlete, when you look at it, you say, when he comes to our program, we're going to get him into one sport now, and 100% of his time is going to be devoted to football. Think about how much more this person can grow, because we're about development. We're not always going to get the 5-star guy or the guy that might be fully matured and is who he is coming out of high school. We're about taking some of those guys and projecting them and say, okay, this guy's a 3-sport athlete. In 2 years, imagine what he's going to be like after getting him down to not running track anymore and not playing basketball and not doing this, not doing that. So I think the upside for them is much higher because they haven't just focused on one thing specific. I've been in the weight room since I've been in 8th grade, and I've been on this regimen and this plan. A lot of times those guys are maxed out, and those multi-sport guys have a ceiling that's going to keep going.
Coach, you have a very veteran football team, high expectations. No spring ball. Are you guys in a better spot compared to most of college football with the veteran team? And then just what are the expectations you have? What is the potential for your football team this year if everything goes right come December and January?
Well, I can't project on what everybody else's situations are like. I know for us, if this was our first year here at the University of Cincinnati, I don't think I would be able to sleep. If this was our second year, I think without a bowl game in the first year and then not having spring ball in your second year, wow, I think it would be really, really difficult. And not just in the development of football, but in your connection. I think that this time more than anything is going to be most difficult on developing connection and relationship with the guys in your team, which, allow you to push them and motivate them. In the development of football, for us, I think we're in a decent position having, 3 offensive line starters coming back with a lot of guys that were, actually 4, because we had a guy hurt, a quarterback coming back for his 3rd year, 4 defensive linemen that are going to be seniors, and a whole secondary that's coming back. We are in a better position than we have been in the first 3 years to not have, had a spring football. We've had the last 2 years of those practices leading up to a bowl game, which are incredibly huge in the development of your young guys in a football program. So I feel like, at least for us, we are in a better position than we would have been in the first 3 years of not having spring football. With that being said, I also know that where it's going to hurt us the most is in the development of those first and second year guys that we were hoping were either going to add some depth to what it is that we're doing or be, key special teams guys for us. In our planning, we're trying to figure out, in losing 2-3 months in 14 practices with those guys, how do we try to get them up to speed to where the older guys are. So I think that in missing spring football is where our program is. Does it change our expectations? Not one bit. We got high expectations. We always have. But the reality is there's going to be a little bit of a different emphasis going into a season. Probably it's a little bit more of a favorite in some ways than we have been in the first 3 years. So the ability to handle that. But we have incredible expectations, and not just because we always do, but because of the core nucleus of the guys we got coming back. Getting probably the best player on our team that we lost last year back is going to be a big bonus for us. Getting the James Hudson, who got to play in the last game that was a really big key for us going into last season. Getting those guys, I think, also puts us in a position to, be really strong up front, which is going to give us a chance.
Coach, I think 50 consecutive starts at Ohio State, that might still be a program record. I'm not sure though.
I think there was Billy Price, the first-round draft pick by the Bengals. I think he might have had 50 or 51, and then maybe a punter had, I don't know, something like that. But they're playing more games nowadays. That gives them an opportunity to get some more starts in there. The reality is most of those guys that start as a young guy leave after their third year, so they don't stay for 4 years.
You played next to Dan Wilkinson. How much did playing next to you help propel him to being the number one pick in the draft? What were some of your favorite memories as a player and as a coach there at your alma mater?
In my first 2 years, I think I played next to him, and they had to double team me, so he got all the single blocks at 3 techniques. So I really helped him a lot in his development of getting one-on-one blocks. No, the best story with Dan is he was a guy coming in from Dayton Dunbar High School, and he got moved over to D-line. So he was a year older than me, redshirted because he was 350 pounds or something, and lost weight to be a defensive lineman, got to like 305. In the first game of the year against Louisville, I was a true freshman. He was a redshirt freshman, and he was just Dan Wilkinson at the time. He wasn't Big Daddy yet. I wouldn't say he wasn't as much of a practice player, but he wasn't as much of a practice player. So he didn't exactly know probably what he was. So going into the first game, there was me and him and another guy, and I got to start because, I don't know, maybe Dan was laid out to practice. I don't know. But what we were doing is we were rolling every 3 plays. So every 3 plays, literally, we would roll. And we got to about the end of the second quarter, and my defensive coordinator, defensive line coach came on the sideline and put his arm around. I said, "Hey, we're going to just leave him in until I tell you to go back in." And I just kind of looked at him and was like, I was wondering when you were going to figure that out. Like in the first half alone, you had like 4 tackles for loss. He's been in a backfield every play. And I'm like, yeah, this isn't going to be very hard to figure out. So that's when he became Big Daddy, and a great teammate, obviously. A guy that played about, I think, 10 years in the NFL, doesn't ever get the credit for, being a sack guy or anything. But, wow, was he a force and a difference maker, and a great teammate.
Your favorite memories as a coach there?
Oh, it's got to be. I mean, obviously, national championship wins, and then obviously the Ohio State-Michigan game. I think those rivalries are what make college football so special. Because the wins and the losses. Last game my senior year, winning in the Rose Bowl, sitting there not wanting to take the uniform off. But it's not just the wins and those things. What you remember as much as anything is the relationships. As a player, to me, my best friends today are all the guys that I played with. And that has a lot to do with why I'm coaching. That has a lot to do with how I go about building, what it is we want to do here. And that's why the locker room is so important to me, because in my time, my greatest friends, and a lot of the reason why I am who I am. I kind of start to look back at the 6, 8, 10 guys that, were probably some of the best friends and people that, in those 4 or 5 years that you spent your time with. And if you start to evaluate where they are now, you start to realize, wow, really high-end people. Not all were the greatest football players in the world. I mean, obviously, Mike Vrabel was the roommate of ours, and he obviously played 14 years in the NFL, to Bobby Hoying, who played 7 years in the NFL. But if you look to a T, all those guys are really high-end people that are thriving in their lives today because of the environment, the culture, the things that we had to do to be successful on the football field. And it's amazing if you really look at, we've got doctors, we've got guys running companies, we've got guys that are head football coaches. And it's just more of a mentality and a group of people that you're around that affects your entire life.
Well, and with this, your oldest son is starting to have this come together for him. And how exciting is it for you to know sort of the track he's on? Obviously, he'll do it his own way and have his own friendships and stuff, but knowing that his hard work, he's going to be a Division I football player. You guys just offered him a scholarship. just for it to see it come together for your oldest kid now. Just talk about that excitement.
It is. It's exciting. It's hard, I think, for a lot of our kids that grow up, in this way, because it's a lot of times all they know. But deep down inside, even as they're growing up, you're like, you don't know how things are going to play out for them. They have this expectation that sometimes isn't always real. And to see it kind of come through and to see what it takes and to see where the ups and the downs have been, it's really gratifying. It's exciting, but it's also difficult because of the situation too. So where it's exciting and all those things, it's also becoming a little bit more difficult just because of the nature of this thing. And then I'm recruiting guys at this time now and in his class, knowing that I feel bad for a lot of these guys because of the situation that we're in with this pandemic, that a lot of these guys had plans and to do a lot of different things, this summer and things like that. And to realize that this has thrown a wrench in a lot of people's lives. I mean, the whole world, I'm not saying, but for these 17, 18-year-olds, their plan in life and the way they expected things to go has really kind of been put on hold. And I'm on one end, looking at it as a coach and as, trying to get what we need to get for our program. And on the other hand, I'm looking at it as a father, and some of the things that he's not going to get to experience, because of the hard work and the things that he's done, is difficult. And it's difficult for all these guys in this class. So it's exciting. It's uniquely different just because of being, a head coach. And it's obviously a bit different because of what we're going through. And, I kept putting off for him, hey, I'm going to take you to visit all these places, just take you around in February. And then I didn't realize we put a dead period for February. So I said, it's okay. Spring break, we'll go to a bunch of places. And then spring break fell and we fell into this. So it hasn't quite worked out. And he's kind of looking at me a little bit cross-eyed, like you said February, then you said spring break. But in the long run, it's going to be the best thing for him if he makes the right decision.
Sure. Well, thanks for coming on and joining us here at 24/7 Sports. Good luck to you and your staff, Coach Fickell, moving forward, and we'll talk to you later.
Anytime. Thanks. All right,
Yep.
Steve.